I'm recording.
Can you hear me now? Yes, it does.
Excuse me, my crayon is a monkey. If I
Taking some interest in learning a bit more about technology, philosophy, and I like to.
I'm an educator.
Absolutely. We're going to stay anonymous.
That's a cop out.
The binary's gone. I thought jingle was like Dutch for cheers.
Welcome to Beyond Binary Thinking. If we can't change your mind, you're probably not using it.
Last episode we talked about communism, and despite me giving Toby and the Swole a fair hearing, I'm still not convinced. I haven't become a card-carrying communist just well, you know, like I'm open to ideas and the conversation, but
we'll get you there.
Nah, I don't buy it yet. But I have had some interesting conversations about the upcoming elections. I still get told by a lot of people that the left just needs to compromise more and become more centrist, and if they do that, they win an election. I don't think the working classes buy the lie of neoliberalism anymore. I don't think an establishment candidate will do the job. Now, speaking of Marx, we're very lucky to be joined by the most charming Ilyas from Marx Does the Washing Up.
Yeah, Karl Marx does the washing up.
Yeah, we'll always get that wrong. Sorry.
What was he doing? Was he sweeping the floor or it was washing up with it? Okay.
Yeah, he's washing up. He does other things, but we don't know if he does the washing up. It's just an excuse for us to leave the house dirty and let the ghost of...
Jordan Peterson would not be happy, would he?
Yeah, but Jordan Peterson's never happy.
Well, that's
like
true.
a lot
That's
of
true.
communists, you're just hoping that someone else will come and fix all your problems.
Also, Karl Marx does the washing up has nothing to do with communism.
Okay.
Obviously.
Okay.
So today we're talking about how to communicate, listen, and learn with those you disagree with.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's what we're talking about.
Nice.
What did you think we were talking about?
We thought we were talking about washing
Well,
up.
I already have qualms with the introduction.
Okay, let's disagree on that then.
Well, like, sounds like there's an assumption that we should be using our mind. What's the introduction?
If we can't change your mind, you're probably not using it.
Yeah, so why is that a
Well-
positive thing to be using your mind?
Wow, I mean, this can be a difficult conversation if we can't even get past the byline of the podcast.
No, I'm just playing.
Trolling. I think it's a good sign of things to come. This is how this conversation.
Karl Marx is doing the sweeping up of our arrogance.
Or polishing your humility into a refined form of arrogance. Maybe.
That's better.
Well, before you shit all over our podcast, why don't you tell us a bit about yours? What your podcast is about?
Okay, so ours is doing what yours should be doing.
Brilliant.
No.
Whoa.
No.
I didn't come prepared for this.
So me and Ilyas were talking earlier, right? And we said
About how to be nice.
rather than have an academic chat about how people should communicate, let's have an example of it going badly and then have an example of it going well. So we workshop an actual comparison.
There we go. Okay, nice.
I think it's a good way. So, our podcast is basically it's just nonsense. It's basically two guys, me and my co-host Shai Telly, and we just talk about like metaphysics and ideas of reality and just like unravel things in a way that doesn't really make much sense.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like absurdist nonsense, but can be useful at times. It's just when it becomes useful, we make it useless again.
Thanks for clearing that up.
That's a great pitch.
But also I have listened to your podcast, and it's quite awesome.
Thank you.
I did really enjoy the religion one. I was like listening to that.
You see, that was episode 1, and I cringed to hear back to it because.
No, I liked it. Like, I don't know what you said. You found you sounded pessimistic. I thought.
I thought I was a bit
optimistic.
negative and pessimistic, and I talked about what I didn't like about atheists rather than. Which is funny. Ironically, I was criticizing them, for not offering an alternative. And I'm worried that that's what I did. I didn't offer an alternative.
But what I found really interesting about that is I didn't find it negative because it was like a refreshing form of pessimism that begins to sound optimistic purely because it's unheard. So maybe it was pessimist.
How optimistic of you. So, guys, what is the topic of the podcast today?
Should we do our little introduction, the name thing, and then we'll get into the meat of it.
Okay. From Amsterdam, I'm Marijn.
From Cordoba, I'm Finn.
From London, I'm Chris.
And from London, I'm Ilyas.
So what is the topic of today's podcast? Well, it's quite an ambitious one, isn't it? I think it's something we all try and do is try to communicate with, listen and learn from people you disagree with. When we did the Brexit episode, for example, I think one thing that we all found frustrating about Brexit was the just divisions that it causes, the anger it causes in people and the sort of fractious arguments you get from it. Well, guys, what do you think about the issue? Do you think it's important to be able to do these things, or do you think, just go for it, have a free-for-all, get angry, get annoyed? What's your take on it?
I think we're forced to communicate, listen, and disagree with a lot more people nowadays, right? Because of modern global communication, you're exposed to so much more opinions than you used to be. So we encounter it a lot.
Stereotype of social media echo chambers, and actually, people used to live in a small village and only be surrounded by people that agreed with them. And now, as bad as Facebook gets, the reason people are so angry is because they're constantly confronted with people they disagree with, more than before. But it does often force you to read your racist uncle's posts. Britain first, brilliant. Cheers, uncle.
Well, I think it's having the algorithms. We used to think of the algorithms, and I think in part it does still do this, is put you a little bit into your own mirrored world. But what it's mostly trying to drive you is to click and engage, right? And you click and engage with things you disagree with, maybe more so than the things you agree with.
Yeah, maybe outrage and kind of debate spark this interaction and this that's the engine of social media, isn't it?
To the platform.
Yeah, I see it happen a lot.
I really thought it was just sexy women that was designed for people to click on.
This is
I didn't think there was anything else.
So social media is too broad, right? Like my take on Instagram is that it's amazing. It's just a bunch of women getting naked. And you remember 10 years ago, you used to have to beg women to send you those photos, and now they just do it for likes in public. So that's my take on Instagram. I don't know how other people use Instagram.
Mine's just full of Warhammer 40,000 models.
There you go. Whatever gets you on.
Well, I think that's the thing is Instagram actually begins to tell you who you are, sadly, rather than who you think you're trying to be. Even though you're always professing who you want to be considered, when you go to your search or the search page, and it shows you all the things that you've actually been clicking on, rather than the things you would like to be clicking on and like to think that you're clicking on. So you've got this really beautiful, philosophical, heightened, oh, Brexit, oh, God, oh, consciousness. And then you go to the search thing and it's naked woman 2, naked woman 1, naked penis enlargement. And it's just a list of, and you're oh, shit, maybe I'm not the mystic I thought I was.
So Instagram's really showing you this kind of yin yang, this the kind of outwardly public self, and then the mirror to your inner self, maybe.
Yeah, I think so.
And then Twitter just seems to be a place for people to shout at each other constantly.
Yeah, it's sound bites, right? It's limited to a certain amount of characters, so it's automatically a sound bite. The name is in it. It's Twitter. One does a twit, and the other one's reinforced this sound bite.
Reddit, I've got time for, and I think Reddit is a community built on if you say something that's unproductive, unhelpful, impolite, the algorithm's just going to drown you out and just turn the volume down. And so Reddit, I find that most communities, and I know Reddit was pretty toxic a few years ago with some questionable subreddits, but the majority of Reddit now seems to be pretty positive, lovely. I even heard a great podcast recently on how Change My View was an amazing example of how the internet is turning more positive, optimistic, and dialogues are opening up.
Can you explain that quickly for anyone who doesn't know what it is? Because I'm not that familiar with it.
Oh, yeah, I can't recommend it enough. So the rules, and they have been refined over the last few years, are that you can't, you have to listen to someone and you can't be toxic. But even, and you have, the idea is you have to be willing to have your view changed. And the funny thing is about 25% of people successfully have their view changed. So people will come on with quite strong political opinions, but the only reason you go on there isn't to grandstand or soapbox, and they do remove those people. It's just to say, I think communism's killed more deaths than any other system, therefore it should be banned, to change my view. And then so people will come at it with, okay, well, as we had in the last episode, okay, a lot of the people that died under communism, it was because of drought and famine, and you get that in any system. So why is it fair to blame that system? And then the person, if they're not sure, can ask questions. And then ultimately, if they agree that their mind has been changed, even somewhat, they award a point or a delta, as it's called. Because of that, it's just a team of people who are trying really hard to persuade someone. And just the act of doing that stops the traditional argument, debate of the online format. You're not going to persuade someone being rude or confrontational or dismissive of their ideas. And so the subreddit has self-taught these like old principles of debate. And it's beautiful to see.
That's fascinating. I'll have to check that out for sure.
I think Reddit is one of the best, specifically also because subreddits can be very different. They are their little own universes. So I don't even mind the fact that there is something like the Donald on a Reddit, because I just don't need to visit it. Let it exist. There's many good subreddits. And for me, it reminds me of what I always have enjoyed the most since the start of the internet are just the message boards and the forums, which is a much slower form of communication. And for a very long time, I've been part of one specific thread on one specific forum where just a specific group of people hang out, different opinions, and we would talk almost every day for a couple of years with a group of maybe 20 people. And sometimes it would go faster with more posts being done, and sometimes a bit more slower. And there were different political opinions there, but there was a respectful level of debate, which I think in part is because it was a smaller community, sort of an isolated, smaller community, and a slower format of message exchange.
So, Moraine, how do you think the size of the community affects the style of communication?
I think it's harder to form a more richer debate with a larger group because you'll get hive minding. It's lots from personal experience. I think on Facebook, the discussion, since it's so public and there could be hundreds of posts in a very short amount of time, the debate gets to be more superficial and more mouth-throwing. And when you're in a sort of slower debate with a few people that can post long format text, embed links, maybe pictures, proof materials, you can get into a more nuanced, deeper, complex search for the truth.
Any thoughts?
It's not just the format, though, of the social media platform, is it? I think the key thing you said there is it's a small group that have known each other for years. And if you look at this behaviour, that's quite key, because compare it to a village as opposed to being anonymous in Manhattan, right? Like if you keep walking past the same people every day, you're going to learn not to be a dickhead.
Right.
Or you're not, and then you're going to get a reputation. And the next time you shitpost, people are going to be like, just ignore him, he's always like that.
Right. So I think this is similar amongst many forums or even subreddits. It's usually more smaller communities that do get to know each other over a certain time. IRC chat communities, which have become Discord communities nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not really sure why we need any of this. Like, what's really the point? I mean, I just think life's why can't we just go have a coffee and talk to a stranger? Like, why do we need some online sort of dystopic platform that we need to refine to become its greatest form? Like, why do we always need to be agreeing or disagreeing or talking about what the universe really is like? I know I have a podcast that does exactly that.
What do you think, Ilyas?
Because it's an addiction, right?
But it's an addiction. I think.
The next podcast idea will be talk to a stranger over coffee.
Yeah, but I mean, personally, that's how I try to live my life. And the podcast is really, in a sense, an extension of that. I do see the podcast to be slightly different because it's just like it's recording that moment rather than going into like some like social media and constructing. I think you lose all the nuance when there's no intonation and you just like get. But it's also, why do we have to like purport our opinion and get people to change their minds? And I don't know, it's quite absurd to think that everybody somehow seems to think that they've got the ultimate understanding of the universe,
right,
and that we've all got to try and convince the rest of the population that we are right.
But do people who try and convince others really think that they do have all the answers?
Yeah, but it works on both sides, right? So I feel that I have the answers and I want to have the more left-wing society. And then I see people with the extreme opposite views fight equally as hard, maybe even harder online to convince others. Right? And everyone is beating each other with sticks trying to convince the other to believe them. And indeed, what is richer conversation? Conversation over coffee, conversation over a podcast. Could be a stranger, could be someone that you can agree and disagree with.
So as often happens with Ilyas' style, there's a lot to unpack with those last 4 sentences.
Yeah.
So one is, whether we should be doing it on social media or face to face. And I think like the best theory I heard about television is that it's for lonely people, it's the illusion of socializing. So if we should always be living with 40 people sat around the campfire chatting. And a lot of people don't have that. They live in a cubicle and they don't like their neighbours, and they put on a TV and there's friendly people having a conversation, and it just triggers a bit of the brain. Like, I'm relaxed. You're having a nice conversation. Yeah. You're not isolated. You're not lonely. Yeah. And there's something to that. You can argue with someone online, and as negative that is, it's better than sat staring at a wall, being aware of how lonely you are, and no one cares about your opinion whatsoever. It's tragic. You're right.
I actually think that's pretty.
It's the methadone for that social addiction we have.
No, but I think that's actually good. Like, stare at the wall, be lonely, look at the abyss.
Be bored,
be bored. I think that's the main thing we've lost.
Well, you could read a book and have a great life. There were
some people that still read books, yeah.
Yeah, but also don't. Like, I think that's...
Be bored.
Yeah, be bored. I think that's what we've lost, is that we don't know how to be uncomfortable. And because at any moment you have discomfort, you look at your phone. That's the general way we've begun to behave. And I guess maybe it makes sense. Like, if you have an immediate out of your discomfort, like, you take it. But if you sit in discomfort, you learn so much about yourself, and you actually become more connected to things, I think.
Yeah. I definitely agree with you there, Ilyas. The approach, I'm always divided between just letting things go and letting them be, and just not engaging, and then also on the other hand engaging and trying to build this better world that sort of Moraine talks about. And it's just when you see stuff like like ignorance or flaws in logic, and then that pedant part in me just wants to go like, no, you're wrong because of this, and then the other part of me just goes, just let it go, it's like they'll find out, and just to be uncomfortable, just. But
isn't there a middle way between that false dichotomy? Like, isn't there a way to, and I say this knowing you do.
Well, that's my
time, politely and gently, right? Suggest that. Are you aware of this logic? I don't know. Even that is the wrong way of doing it. Are you aware that you're committing a logical fallacy?
No. Well, I hadn't really finished my point. My aim is my aim is to somehow find that middle ground between those two extremes that I know are possible within me. And I find most of the time I'm probably falling somewhere in the middle, but probably more to the side when it comes to online communication. The pedant side, being harshly critical of myself. I try and to bring it back to the not trying to care so much. And it goes through cycles, I think. Really, my overall being is like in a sort of a yin yang encompassing both, that are sort of swirling round, and at any point I could be anywhere in that. Sometimes I'm just looking at the wall being bored, as Ilyas said, or, just sitting and doing nothing, or just literally just drinking a tea. And other times I'm super, in my head, in my ideas. And so I guess it's finding a balance, like you say, Chris, a middle way.
But I think the issue with a lot of these things is, I think our society, or maybe it's just by nature, that we don't appreciate like intangible things as much as like something which is tangible is there's not much rationality to avoid it, in a sense, in the way that you don't understand. So like staring at a wall is an experience or a form of knowledge that you don't really know what it entails, and you can't like put it on your CV. Like, what did you do? I stared at the wall for a year. It's like, I should go to MIT. Like, it doesn't.
And it's a tough sales pitch as well. It's like, social media is problematic. What's the solution? Hey kids, stare at walls.
But you learn what a wall is. You learn what whiteness is. You learn what like air is, paint. You learn what your psyche's about. You learn your internal ontology. It's like, but you've got to let go of.
Nothing against introspection, but there's not necessarily bad to communicate, I think, with others online. I think even recording this podcast, publishing it online is a form of communication with others online. And I used to go into debates a lot, both on message board and for a while on Facebook. And then I just completely stopped trying to convince anyone else. And I use it more to disagree in the nuance and the detail. So there's brilliant communities out there that can debate the very minutiae of things, but which can be very interesting. Philosophy, religion, right? And so it's more of a way to figure things out yourself, to form your own opinions, form your own mind, take some in from others, maybe disagree a little to open up a little bit more elsewhere. And you can do this online, and you can do this in your own private life, drinking a coffee with a stranger or a friend. I try to do both.
Or even with yourself. Right?
Or even with yourself. I think it's a balance of multiple avenues. And I get triggered by the Facebook discussions, but I try to stay out of them.
They're designed to. So yeah, you highlight the difference between the academic Socratic debate and the tribalistic, fuck you, you're definitely wrong, I'm definitely right. And the reason is because you're an idiot and I'm smarter than you. Case closed.
But like, yeah. No, but I guess it's like, so what portion of these discussions is concerned with ego and like trying to get yourself, be one up on someone, and what is about actually getting closer to the truth?
Well, and that's the beauty. And I've started a weird approach where I will argue something I don't necessarily believe in, which it's all the same trappings, just shouting at someone online. There's this theory that if you need an answer to something, don't post a question online, post the wrong answer, and everyone will jump on and correct you.
That's true.
So I genuinely have spent the last 2 years arguing for Brexit on Facebook, just because I want to hear the best arguments against it.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot about Brexit by posing as a Brexiteer for the last 2 years on Facebook.
Yeah. So the path towards absolute knowledge is wankerhood.
There are many paths, and this is the one I found.
This is almost like The Onion, right? We have a Dutch version called The Speld, and it's like this sort of outrageous version of a news message, just to get the point across of how outrageous and absurd the reality is.
The Daily Mash.
Parody and comedy for years have beautifully highlighted the absurdity of life, right? Like, life just seems a parody of itself right now. I could easily imagine a parody article about Donald Trump, and no way can you tell whether it's real or a parody, right?
But then, if we all know Chris is like it's a nice guy with nuanced opinions and stuff, who apparently behaves like an asshole, like online, but just like not an asshole, but just like purporting these views he doesn't believe in. So could we not just grant that kind of like benefit of the doubt to other people's views? We don't like. Could we just say Trump is? Yeah. Could we just not say Trump is just like doing some art project? To learn about what politics is.
He's like the Andy Kaufman of politicians, right?
Yeah, I think it's pretty dangerous. No, but it's dangerous if we believe it, right?
Yeah, but I mean, like, Do you see what?
He's dangerous even if you don't believe in him. It's not like fairies. Trump exists.
No, but if nobody actually bought into his ideology,
well, then he wouldn't have won the
Yeah,
president. The president of the United States. Of
I think I
America.
always get trapped on the sort of ideas like, is the world an illusion? And that shuts everything down.
I mean, it could. I think there does need to be some resistance to certain ideas that I think humanity are beyond. Do you know what I mean? That do translate over into real world like persecution and horrible stuff. You know what I mean? So yeah. I mean, I would like to assume that people are given the benefit of the doubt and say, well, probably they're just trolling. But at what point do you have to take it seriously and go, yeah, wait a minute, maybe we shouldn't do eugenics programs or whatever it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
No, sure.
But also, what Chris was doing is not trolling, really. Was it? You're not trolling. You were just posing an alternate opinion to see what response.
Yeah, but Brexit is such a contentious issue. I think even posting about it is trolling, right?
Oh, really?
I think there's an element of trolling in it. I mean, Chris, you enjoy it to some degree, right?
Oh yeah, no, and this is why it's trolling, is because I knew I was winding people up and they were getting furious in the comments, and I was sat there pissing myself. And to a casual reader, I was earnestly rebutting their points one by one. But everyone that knew me, I was just fucking being a dickhead and winding them up for my own amusement. Some people have better hobbies. I'll admit that.
See, I can't deal with that kind of conflict. Like, I just don't like somebody shouting, even if it's online. I actually find everybody's like, it's anonymous online, so you don't need to do it. I get much more hurt online because in a conversation, I think I can recorrect things. People will either understand my intention or my intonation, and if they misread it, I can recorrect. Whereas online, I don't feel like there's any way of recorrecting. You just throw both of you down the rabbit hole deeper and deeper.
Yeah, I've been down that rabbit hole. Yeah. It just gets fueled and fueled and fueled because you don't indeed see the nuanced intonation and...
Oh yeah, and I don't think it would have been possible for me to have those arguments face to face. Like, I'm the opposite, face to face. And this is something I'd like to talk about is, I think it varies culturally. So we talk about how to disagree. I think disagreements mean different things to different cultures. We all know the British cliche of furiously disagreeing with someone and keeping it entirely hidden. And they say their idea and you're like, yeah, maybe, that's interesting. Which is British for like, fuck you and the horse you came in on, I hate all of your ideas.
Really? Yeah. And it only comes out.
Whereas to an American, that's interesting. It's like, okay, we're doing it. Yeah, we've built a startup together now. Cool.
Can you give some other examples? Have you guys experienced any other examples of disagreement?
Well, so the obvious ones are in Southeast Asia, hierarchical Asian cultures where who you disagree with is more based on their status relative to yours. So that becomes massively more important. And if your Korean boss suggests a restaurant for lunch, you're going there. Like, it would be incredibly rude to be like, oh, actually, I've heard of this other place. Like, that would be a massive faux pas. So in some places, the way they deal with the awkwardness of disagreement, which is a broken social contract that is understood across the world, right? It's awkward, it's difficult, it's better when everyone agrees, in theory, for social cohesion. Might not be the best thing if your leader's wrong for everyone to be like, yo, let's agree. So every culture has this problem of how to handle the awkwardness of disagreeing. And some just go, okay, whoever's the oldest or most senior decides. Some go, oh, we'll just shout it out, and whoever backs down must have been wrong. And some go, oh, we'll just avoid talking about it for 2 months and secretly hate each other. That's the British take, as far as I can tell.
I really love the Spanish way of doing it when people get into really big disagreements, especially if they're not friends. They use the polite form of addressing the other person. It's so good.
Ooh,
instead of using tú, they use usted. Usted.
And is wrong, motherfucker.
It's so funny. It's so funny.
Wait, so you agree with them and then you say usted, which means you disagree.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, you just treat them with like loads more polite talk. It's like a polite way of talking. But then actually you're like destroying them by using the polite
You
form.
can't have that in English where you're like, oh, I could see how one might believe that.
Yeah.
You get a bit posher.
But it's like when your mum calls you by your full name. So it's like, Ilyas Kassam, do the dishes.
Yes,
Marx hasn't done it for a long time.
No bloody fucking ghost is gonna do your dishes. Clean up. I did not raise a little insolence, boy. But yeah.
Karl Marx. Go to your room.
Go to your room. But I think I don't know, in terms of I feel I don't often disagree with many people or get into situations of conflict. Or maybe I'm just not aware of it. But I think it has a lot to do with like how you hold truth as an idea. So I think for me, I don't really believe in any like deep, profound way that any concept is true. I find it's always like an approximation of a truth, and it's always using a language to kind of structure reality in a way that will never really pay true likeliness to the reality.
It's always the map, not the actual.
Yeah, exactly. It's always the map. So I think if you're arguing about maps rather than actual realities, it becomes kind of easier to be more open about what they are. And like everything's like everything just becomes for me an interesting map. And I think if I'm really concerned with truth, like what I believe you can access truth, but it is mostly just staring at a wall. We're back to the wall. Like I think that is really, yeah. So I think
Marx
this
does the Zen.
does the Zen, yeah, exactly.
Oh, I thought we were talking about Pink Floyd's album. I thought you. Sorry.
Yeah, just staring at the LP.
Great albums.
Yeah.
So I agree with this. So for me, I think the difference really comes in how much is the nuance, right? So when you're talking about maps, I think the more interesting the map becomes is the more nuanced the map becomes, the more detailed the map becomes, rather than the very simplistic view. So what troubles me in Facebook debates is that often, and especially comes for me from the right-wing side, is the argument is polarized. It's very simplistic, meant to feed emotions, rather than the left trying to be more find where is the nuance? Where is the nuance? Not necessarily saying it's there, but at least let's explore the nuance of the subject.
You've decided that your side has more nuance than the other side. But isn't that a product of the fact that you're more familiar with your side than the other side?
I'll give you an example, right? So what is, for me, a hot online debate on Facebook? It's to do with the Zwarte Piet, the Black Piet Christmas holiday we have here in Holland.
Are you familiar with this, Ilyas?
No.
Okay, explain it.
Okay, so we have a Dutch version of Santa Claus here. And the Dutch version of Santa Claus comes on a white horse. And he has black slaves that
helpers,
are white,
right? They're helpers.
Like black painted white people.
Can you confirm they're unpaid?
They're doing it for the paper note.
I think this is how I came to know Chris.
They do it out of love for their white master.
Okay.
And they have like red lips, curly black hair,
big gold earrings. Yeah.
And it's completely like the Suriname racist, native, savage kind of idea of Western culture versus appropriating.
Caricature.
Yeah. And a couple years ago, the debate here started that it would be a racist thing. Two artists stood on the streets where there's a day when Sinterklaas arrives in the Netherlands with all his black Piets. And
from
they stood
Spain,
there from Spain on the boat.
Mm-hmm.
And he brings the presents. And it's supposed to be a children's holiday, right? And
isn't it funny how mental someone else's tradition sounds? But then I was thinking, this is fucking nuts.
Right.
But then, like, unlike in England, where he comes from the North Pole with reindeer and white slaves, and that makes sense.
That's totally fine.
Anyway, carry on.
Right. And so two people stood there with a T-shirt, Black Pete is racism. And from there's been an ongoing discussion and it's a very harsh discussion, with protests going back and forth and even threats. And look it up on the news if you want, or look it up on Google if you want to. There's a lot being invoked since then. And a lot of people here in Holland have clinged to this as being like, this is our tradition, stay away from our tradition. It's not racist. Especially the word racist took a lot of people like, I'm not a racist. You can't call me a racist. What are you talking
it gets
about?
people's backs up, right?
Right?
No one wants to be labelled a racist.
And so, but they've closed themselves up
most people.
entirely from any of the nuance behind the debate. For them, it's completely black and white. This is our tradition. It's not racist. That's the end of it. And everyone else is trying to be like, well, but do you understand that maybe the feelings of, colored people here in Holland are maybe a bit different about that, and black children are being called Zwarte Piet as well. So it's also a thing which people bully. And so trying to look for the nuance, right? Do you understand how Western colonism has worked, how we've appropriated other cultures, how we have dominated other cultures? But these people do not want to get into any of the nuance of it. So they'll keep repeating the same points, the same black and white talking points. And so...
No, but I think sometimes with this is that a lot of times the idea is kind of focused on kindness, but the dialogue doesn't manifest the kindness that the idea is trying to purport. The idea meaning trying to get rid of this idea, essentially. But so I think in this way that what people don't always understand is that things are taken very personally. So it's like you're attacking an idea or a system, but people feel like they're being attacked for being part of the system. So everybody takes it in a very ad hominem kind of way. And that's when everybody reacts. And nobody kind of recalibrates or justifies to that. It just becomes people fighting each other. And then the actual intention of the issue is completely lost because at some point, nobody really cares about the issue. They only care about who's more righteous and who's winning, right?
And I think the key there is the word racism. It's very hard to open a dialogue with someone while saying,
you're a racist.
I'm putting you in a box with Nazis and the KKK.
Yeah.
But, you can't open a conversation with that and then be like, so would you like to listen to me about why you're wrong? No, we're not friends.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's a bad start to a
So it has
conversation.
two sides, though, because at the one end, if those two artists would not have stood there with one T-shirt saying Zwarte Piet is racism, the debate would not have been opened the way it got opened. And then eventually it did turn out to be a pain in the back because indeed it got too many people very self-defensive and ignoring then any of the nuance of the debate that should have been looked for.
Sure. And every protest, every angry Muslim that gets handed a microphone shouting death to the West. It's like you'll always give the angriest people the microphone and they'll always be the people that start the debate. But we, the greater public, have to acknowledge that when you're talking with someone, if your genuine aim is to persuade them, then calling someone racist off the bat is probably going to be counterproductive.
Right.
Well, if you're really...
But think about OK Boomer. It's the same thing.
Yes, and that's an interesting, modern phenomenon of our time. And OK Boomer is just a beautifully hilarious meme to shut someone down. And that's great if that's what you're aiming for. It doesn't open the dialogue, doesn't open the conversation.
No, but
that's not its aim.
Isn't
right?
the point of it to use it in those situations where the other person's closed the dialogue anyway? So it's like, well, you're not going to get anywhere anyway, so you may as well just have a little.
So
cheap
that was
laugh
to
at
say
it at the end. No.
Same idea behind Zwarte Piet is racism. People had closed the debate for so long. They're like, okay, let's just point out the real painful truth behind it, which is OK Boomer's trying to do as well. There's a painful truth behind the Boomer generation because it's a generation that fucked the whole world up the Western generation, right? They made a lot of mistakes.
Do you not think there's a bit of a generalization there talking about a generation? Because you've got to remember that
it's not necessarily anyone's fault, but
my point is
a lot
that
of things happened during that generation that has put the world in
difficult
like
situation.
The Vietnam War,
Yeah.
which a lot of people protested.
Yeah, but
I think that's maybe the problem, that there's a blame sort of narrative that seems to be filtered into all of this. And like you said, it's not their fault or somebody's fault, but as long as the sort of narrative has kind of a space or assumes that it's somebody's fault or people can use it to feel blamed, then they feel personally attacked and then it kind of just shifts out.
And I think that's the problem, Marijn, with we're nuanced and they're not. If you want to solve problems like this, the extra layer of nuance needed is how do we cross that gap? And that takes a lot of nuanced thought.
Well, I think it's mostly just like listening to the other person. So if you put more prevalence in hearing what the other person has to say rather than them hearing what you have to say, then once people feel heard, then you can start having a conversation. I think that's all it is. Nobody really gives a shit about hearing what other people have to say. They just want to make sure that their point is heard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Maybe just spot some logical fallacies and just try to trigger. No, but I've seen the Earthling Ed does that, right, with his vegan videos. So he lets other people talk, and then he just tries to spot logical fallacies, and then just keeps on asking questions about those logical fallacies to try to trigger the other person to see that it is a logical fallacy and that maybe they need to change their thinking around this subject.
Yes, and harking back to what we said before, he doesn't jump on them the moment they make them, right? He gives them enough rope to hang themselves with.
He lets them,
But
he
it
lets
also-
them choose kindly how they wish to be destroyed. Which one would you like to do?
Choose your death.
Clouds feel pain too.
but the focus is-
okay, if you want.
I think the focus is still on destruction. And I think if we're just trying to understand, like, really...
That's just the parlance of
No,
YouTube,
yeah, that's
right? Like,
yeah.
Jordan Peterson destroys libtard.
Yeah, but the thing is, YouTube only gives us what we want, right?
It's the clickbait, though,
So
isn't it? It's
it's
this vicious circle because as soon as we click on those things more, then the people who make the content on YouTube are going to put those kind of titles because they're the ones which get the most clicks. So it's like a vicious loop. It's like
it's like the naked lady phenomenon.
Yeah, exactly. It's the vegan activist, Earthling Ed. I'm sure he's like very against violence. I've never heard him say anything, violently in a violent way. He's very compassionate, but his videos are titled, these kind of things. And it's kind of a vicious circle. How do we get out of it? As soon as you try and get out of it, you don't get the videos, you don't get the clicks, the views. So this.
The other thing that Ilyas said I thought was really interesting is about listening. And my background, as I've said, I'm a salesman. And it's odd. I know people don't want spiritual guidance from a salesman. It's normally considered diametrically opposed to it, right? But interestingly enough, I have learned a lot about how to have interesting, nuanced, polite disagreements with people from my experience in sales. Because the cliche of salesman is the majority of salesmen people interact with. It's spammy, cold calling, all the cliches about salesmen. But if you're actually doing like big money sales, right, like a £200,000 deal, then none of those things apply. And you'd be surprised how little people know about sales at that level and how little it's about Jedi mind hacking someone, pushing them into your agenda. You spend most of your time listening. Really, like, no one's going to give you money if you rock up with a preconceived idea and just go, yeah, you should do this. It's like, you're only going to have any success with that art of persuasion if you spend 90% of the meeting listening, encouraging them to talk more, finding out more, and not even laying traps for logical fallacies, but actually understanding, as you said with Earthling Ed, ask why and get underneath the reason below. It's one thing, someone's concerned with immigration. Okay, why? And more often than not, it's not because they don't like the dark person on their town. It's because last time their mum went to the hospital, there was a massive queue and it took her hours to get thing. And lots of the patients were brown and the doctor was brown. And in that vulnerable moment, they felt, okay, well, I'm going off on tangent, but the point is that the more you listen and understand, the more you'll learn and the more likely you are to actually have an engaging conversation where there's even the chance of persuading them. But if you go into it with the aim, it's like flirting with a member of the opposite sex or the same sex, if that's what you're doing.
You see, persuading people is much like making love to a beautiful woman. Twists only. Here you are. Explain how it is.
If you walk up to someone and you're like,
I'm listening.
Gonna nail it, right? Like a predator. Like, that's creepy as fuck and no one likes it. And that's how most people approach debates. They're like, this is the outcome
And
I
dating.
want. Your will is mine. I will have my way with you. Bend to my vision of the world.
But I think it's true. I think this is like, when I was saying how much of it is ego and how much of it is like actually genuinely trying to understand what truth is. I think a pretty decent indicator of that is like, if you are listening and trying to understand what the other person's saying, then maybe you are trying to get to the truth. And if you're just trying to tell people the truth, most of the time it is just ego.
Yeah.
Probably
not the truth.
Yeah.
Sure.
Or you put a lot of stock. I think there's put a lot of stock in certain ideas, and you attach to certain ideas, especially if like, you have a podcast and you have, a public persona.
To be fair, like, our podcasts are all about, yours as well, disagreeing with each other and being okay with that. It'd be a very boring podcast if I said an opinion and Finn and Marek and you went,
Yep. That's
nailed
good.
it.
There'd be a lot of awkward silence.
Why do you talk to people? Because I talk to people mostly just to learn. And when
Yeah.
you want to learn, you listen, you maybe ask questions, or maybe you introduce a certain side path that, hey, let's explore this together, because what are your opinions about that?
I don't know. I think this idea of like having the disagree, the interestingness of having to disagree is part of the same binary thinking that is against the disagreeing, right? I think that really it's more about having like honest kind of conversations where we actually consider the other person, and we're not trying to determine our perspective in contradiction to or like, that we don't need to have a position. I guess the idea of like a disagreement and agreement is that everybody's in a position. I have this position, you have this position.
Which one's right?
Yeah.
Let's fire shells across no man's land into each other's
Yeah,
trenches.
exactly. And it's basically whoever has the most humility loses.
Yeah, and that's the fundamental problem with that kind of debate, right? Like, honestly, a good conversation, you should walk away from being like, oh, thanks, I learned something.
Yeah.
But in competitive debating, that would be to admit failure.
Yeah, exactly.
And on TV, you have to posture and be like, I learned nothing from your wrong world.
So when you say like admit failure, it's about also being able to have a vulnerable conversation about what the fuck we're doing on this globe in the middle of a giant universe that can be violent and can be beautiful at the same time.
So we hinted at cultural differences earlier, and I just became acutely aware. Do you think this is more of a male problem? Because I've seen women communicate differently. And they're wrong. Men are right.
Well, we cleared that one up.
Do you think what we're discussing, that combative debate, do you think it is more of like it's... So we used to have a point where, okay, we'll settle this in the ring. Me and you were going to punch, and whoever's got the biggest right hook wins. And we've kind of like taken that, okay, it's better that we're not throwing punches anymore, but we're just doing the wordsmith equivalent. Like,
yeah, well, there's a penetrative quality to it, I guess, if that's like, well, I mean, it's a no.
giggity.
I don't know. But
I've seen women argue in similar ways. I mean, it could be like in terms of numbers, maybe there were more men doing this kind of like in a more debatative style online. But I mean, I've seen it from both genders.
what? Yeah. So what are you calling the masculine thing? Like debate? How
competitive debating, getting your ego, and
okay.
What you would describe as a testosterone.
I don't know about you,
argument.
but I've seen just as many women posts on Facebook that are competitive, and this is my position, and I'm right, and I'm trying to convince you, and
That's
it
true.
happens from both
I was
genders.
just sort of comparing it to, I think, me and Ilyas's mutual friend, Sophie. And I watched her have a disagreement with her friend. And I gotta be honest, that conversation was alien to me. Shout out to Sophie and Dee. They disagreed, and then they patched it up, and they flipped positions and took time to understand each other's positions. And maybe they're just weirdos, maybe that's not a female thing. But I have seen it tend more towards the female sphere of conversation, and it frankly confused me. And me and my other guy friend who was sat watching it were just jaws open, like They noticed, like, so much so that at the point that it broke the tension because they just noticed how confused we were by the whole interaction.
So is this because men are culturally, historically more competitive than cooperative then?
I mean, the evolutionary position on it is that men do tend towards forming a clearer hierarchy. Not necessarily dominance, and it shifts between tasks. So if we're going to go hunt a mammoth, Ilyas is best with the spear, so he's the leader for this mission. If we're going to go debate the other village and negotiate with them, I got this, guys. Right.
Anyone needs any
I'm fine, you
dishes
can do
washed,
that.
I can do that.
Talk to Marx.
Well, I'll be staring at a wall. I don't know. You guys do what you like.
If it's competitive wall staring.
Who can stare harder?
Ilyas will have us all just staring at the wall. No mammoths to be hunted.
Yeah.
That wasn't a particularly nuanced comparison of gender studies. But that's my point. This is the four men debating this. Like,
You guys all seem pretty open to, like, we're listening to each other, no? Or not
Sorry,
really?
what did you say? No.
you're wrong.
Yeah, I think listening is really the key. Listening, understanding. I think as well, do you not think it could be related, Chris, your point, talking about gender, competition, cooperation. What about like empathy and sympathy, like putting yourself in the other person's position? I mean, you're talking about it in terms of like a more of a kind of a trolling perspective, but what about, trying to genuinely understand what it would be like for that other person you're talking with to live that situation, then why they think that?
Let's go back to the Schwarzer-Pete example, right? How would you talk to someone who feels their culture, their history, their childhood is under attack by a bunch of people calling them racist and calling their parents racist for something that they just have a fond childhood memory of?
Well,
I don't think someone that
I
like
grew up,
Schwarzer-Pete is condoning slavery.
but I grew up in that.
Do you?
I grew up
is
in
that actually your opinion?
No, I grew up in that situation. For me, like my mum's Dutch. I used to go to Holland a lot. Went to the Zwarte Piet stuff in Holland and in the UK in my Dutch communities and stuff. I loved it. Do you know what I mean? Zwarte Piet would come around, give you sweets and paper note, and I thought it's completely normal. I didn't have any reason to think weirdly of it. And then as I learned more about history, and as I learned about the debate that was going on in Holland, I thought, yeah, actually, it doesn't have to be a black person, does it? Like, why can't Zwarte Piet just be white, or at least not with the earrings and big red lips and yeah, right. But there's some people who generally go around saying because he's gone down the chimney, sort of grasping at straws. But I guess
there's people that get angry at the idea of a black James Bond. Like, how unrealistic! The man with an invisible car that fires missiles couldn't be black.
Yeah, ridiculous.
That's outrageous.
Or a woman, even more ridiculous. I mean. What's the point? But the point you're trying to say is try and put yourself in the other person's shoes, right? You're saying put yourself in a. See, I can't think of any situation where there's no victim. Do you know what I mean? I can't think of any.
But what is the victim with a wealthy, university-educated person who's not white getting upset and crying about Schwarzer-Pete, right? Against some 70-year-old guy who's like, it's my tradition. Like, in that situation, is there really a clear victim and a clear racist evil?
So I'd like to respond to that. Yeah. So first of all, I do think the best thing is just to listen and put yourself in their position, and then ask for reciprocity. So ask them to put themselves into a different position as well. One of the people behind this movement has been going more to community houses and having meetings with just people there to talk about it. And he's had.
I presume she's not wearing a t-shirt while she's doing that.
No, he's not. And he's been having very good results with that, and people do listen and change their perspective. You put yourself in their perspective. You have a tradition. Indeed, it felt very innocent and beautiful, and you don't want to have this loss of Dutch culture that, makes you a little bit of who you are as well. But then ask them to put themselves in the position of a 8-year-old black girl who comes in school and is being bullied, being a Zwarte Piet, maybe ask them to understand the way, and maybe not entirely ask them to understand how institutional racism works, but maybe try to get them to empathize with parts of it.
Yeah. No, I think really the way forward is very much that if you're coming from one side, you kind of list the positives of the other side before you list the purpose while you're there, like the negatives. So you're like, this is a beautiful tradition because it fosters community. It kind of creates a sense of nostalgia and connection to the homeland, to family, all these kind of ideas. And then you say, but does it really need to have this specific archetype? Like, what does this specific archetype really benefit within this system? And then you have that discussion around that. How do we find community and family and all these ideas and find their new forms?
Yeah.
Can I disagree here? Not about what just Ilyas said, but
Curious.
the example of a bullied little girl. Couldn't either side use that? Couldn't the old man say, oh, my granddaughter brought in a Black Pete doll to school and all the other kids bullied her for being racist? Like, anyone can claim, but wouldn't it be nasty if a small child didn't like this? It's not a strong argument.
Yeah.
Is it?
But there are examples of racism, though. There are other examples of racism happening where people are being targeted.
Yes, and there are
specifically
examples
for
of
that.
people who feel like under threat and called racists and hate that.
Yeah, but like being a racist
I'm
isn't
not
the same
saying
as
they're
being called a
equal.
racist.
Like, I'm
is
just
it?
saying the argument can be had.
Chris, quite honestly, we can look at reality and we see a lot more children being bullied to call Zwarte Piet than children being bullied to be racist, because that hardly happens. We also seeing that for the pro Zwarte Piet, so the ones who want to keep it, it's become a forefront from proper racist organizations.
It's been kind of hijacked, hasn't it?
And they've been escalating with violence during protests, whereas the anti-Zwarte Piets have been doing it very peacefully. So it's sort of become like it's opening up a little bit of a festering wound there, where it's become a battlefront for the proper right-wing, open racist people.
There you go. There is nuance. There's levels.
Chris, just out of curiosity, do you think it's which one is worse, or what do you think about being called a racist or being a racist? Are they the same?
Well,
They're not
it's
really
an
the same,
interesting
are
one. No. You'd have to put that on a two-dimensional grid. So being called a racist when you're not would actually be pretty negative, right? Can we agree on that?
Well, it's not ideal, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Whereas being called a racist when you are, well, yeah, fair play.
Exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
so-
The difference is I grew up with Sinterklaas and I loved Zwarte Piet when I was young. And okay, I studied cultural anthropology, so I've learned a little bit more about the way colonizations work, the way institutional racism works. I don't consider myself a racist, even though they say Zwarte Piet is racism, because I was able to see, okay, maybe we need to let this part go, because indeed it is connected to institutional racism. It is connected to
but
power
this is the problem with
structures.
the binary. You're on the right side of a bell curve, and there's all sorts of lines along that way.
Yeah,
But
Some of
I don't
which,
expect
with the right
I don't expect
persuasive
everyone
argument, with a nice dialogue
to drop it tomorrow.
could be where you are. Some never who could. But you understand that you've just put yourself on the side of good and gone, phew.
No, but I think it's because of exactly what we were talking about, a lack of this listening and a lack of this empathy, that we create sort of systems where the opposite things embody all the same kind of structures and behaviors as the thing that it's fighting. What you're kind of saying is that wokeness begins to have the same aggressiveness as the initial racism, right? And I think maybe we haven't got to that point yet, but it's possible that it could go there, that
Yes.
really the issue is that because we're not challenging the racism with a sense of empathy and listening and like nuanced perspective of where it grew from, we just go in this very anti-aggressive form. So that begins to like mimic the kind of behaviors and structures of the initial racism.
Yes, and shouting back to Meringue's form that kind of the left is more nuanced. there are definitely examples of the woke scolding Twitter left witch hunt mobs who describe all the worst behaviour that we described on the right. If you want to cherry pick that as an example.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to the ego thing. Like, how much of it is ego? Because once it becomes driven by ego, it begins to be so much formed on the identity rather than the issue. So it's not trying to create as sort of benevolent environment for the people who are oppressed. It's really about how do I show that I'm fighting for the oppressed? And then that's when I think it becomes aggressive, no? Just a note, I'm the only not white person.
Yeah. No. I didn't realise, this is the joy, right, of modern London life. There's only, I guessed, but only when you knocked on my door did I realise you weren't white.
Ah, really? Okay.
I was kind of worried.
Same with me. I only realised I wasn't white when I knocked on
your door. And you could see the racist look of disappointment.
I was thinking earlier on when you...
What have I invited into my house now?
Ilyas, when you were doing your impression of your parents, and I was thinking like, either it's possible you're not white or you may be being a bit racist. I didn't know which one it was, but I thought,
I heard you guys like consciously making sure you didn't laugh. And
there was an awkward
it was always like, oh yeah. Actually, my mum doesn't really have much of an Indian accent, but I am from an Indian family.
And you're allowed to accentuate and exaggerate for comedic effect.
Of course.
I don't know. Maybe I'm not. Maybe that's not actually I don't know. But I think the problem with all this like racism and stuff is we really need to get more connected to the intention rather than the language. I feel like we get so caught up in the language and the forms that we don't understand like what are people really trying to say and maybe failing to say. Mm-hmm. Right? And I think that's where the thing when somebody gets called a racist when they're not a racist is people are getting caught up in what they're saying, not what they're really trying to say.
Yeah.
And I think if you're in tune enough, which I don't think takes that much really, you can connect to the intention. If you're not always on that like wanting to fire, right? You can understand what people are trying to say, and they're failed by their language.
And I would say like, so our last episode was criticizing the left, right? And where they get it wrong and where they make these Twitter witch hunts and where they're negative. Let's turn this reflective view on ourselves. Was that a persuasive argument for a woke person listening?
Oh, I didn't listen.
It's like, you're not that woke, so you're not the target audience.
It's a good question, Chris. It's a good question. I'd like to hear from, I'm sure we all would like to hear from people who did listen to it and if they were convinced or not. But
they're not listening.
They're probably not. Yeah.
No, it is worth having, and I wish I had more conversations with people I disagree with. And the problem is, I have spent so much time. I wouldn't say like I'm not fucking the Gandhi Jesus Buddha of arguments, but I've spent so much time debating things that I often remove my ego from it. That sometimes I play devil's advocate so much I forget what I actually believe on the subject.
That's the risk.
I would disagree. It sounds like you are fucking Jesus and Gandhi and arguments.
I'm not going to disagree with that. I'll take that.
I said you are.
I did here first.
No, you are fucking Jesus and Gandhi and arguments is what I meant.
They're hot on Instagram.
Yeah, it's the comma. It's moved the comma.
Yeah. Devil's advocate.
I think that is the risk of playing devil's advocate too much, is that you forget maybe where do you fall on that line. Where actually what is your opinion?
So
but I think that's the great thing.
It's refreshing.
Because like you transcend the ego. If you cannot find where your position is, it's like re-pointing where you actually exist to a point that you stop to exist. It's like dissolving the self.
But the counter to that is that you're just a dandelion seed in the wind. You just blow any which way. Okay, until it's time to take a stand, right?
I say you can still have core moral values. I think I can see the nuance and the complexity in a lot of ways, and then still don't want to have mass violence or mass starvation or mass economic inequality, and nudge people towards those goals.
Yeah, no, I think that's. don't want to be a dick. Well, actually, I do, I think.
That classic, I'm not racist, but I don't want to be a dick, but...
But I think, is there any space to talk about like free will and maybe the idea of like, I think a lot of these ideas are based on a very individualistic idea of the self and other people and how we like, we belong to ourselves, we have our own individuality, and I think if you believe in a certain god or a mystical being or something, it restructures the whole idea in which these issues become relevant or discussed or...
This is what happens when Marx does the washing up.
This is, yeah.
Crashes our podcast.
So, I mean...
All right, let's get into it. Let's do it.
I don't know, it's sort of irrelevant, but relevant.
No, I see what you're saying. I think it is important and relevant. It's just that's a really big
what are you
discussion
saying?
about
Like,
free will, isn't it?
If we're all God's children, does it matter when we disagree? What's the point?
Is that the point you're trying to make?
Well,
Or is it, like,
I guess there's 2 points in a sense. One is like, what is our degree of agency, right? So if we don't have much agency, then what is the function of aggressive disagreeing arguments fueled with anger to cause social
If we don't
change?
have agency, what's the function of anything?
Yeah.
Literally, what's the point?
Seriously,
I mean,
yeah.
that's the thing. It's a
That's
really
why
annoying.
it's
It's very
walls, right?
difficult.
No, see, that's why it's a really important point, but it's so unimportant because there's no resolve to it. Like
So-
we can't actually,
When you
even
have-
if there is no free will, we kind of still have to behave
My
as
answer
if there
to
is.
this is I've been studying absurdism, and obviously Finn's more of an expert than I, but the idea is if there's no free will, if there's no point in life, well fuck it. Like, that doesn't change anything. You might as well rebel or revolt against that and try and do it anyway. So even if there's no free will, or if we're living in a computer simulation, or if we're living according to God's plan, what can you do? What is the result? You can
Well, and if
all
you
action's pointless, but I just end up in a circle and go, fuck it, I'll do what I want anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense also because like that whole circle was determined, right? If you don't believe, if there's no free will, then
Sure, but
to believe in free will is also determined.
yes, but
right?
you can sit in a room staring at a wall, stressing about whether that circle is a never-ending snake, and just get on with life and just have good conversations with nice people and eat yummy food and have good experiences.
But okay, so I think my point is really like if we get to a point, because there's it's not just, it doesn't have to be just free will or determinism or fatalism. There can be kind of
Or absurdism.
well, absurdism's definitely, I'm down with absurdism. No, there's nothing. But
I can tell when you arrived at my house in a dressing gown and like Russian furry hat.
I didn't know that's what he was wearing. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
yeah, with my Indianness, yeah,
Surprise Indianness.
surprised, yeah.
Not to him, it was. Not to Ilyas.
Well, no.
No, it was
That would
surprising
be
to
it.
me, but I think that's what's most interesting. That's why I'm with absurdism. I like the idea that when I got to your door, only then did I realize I was Indian. You said
No, that's not absurdism. That's just absurd. That's absurdism with the small a, not the big a.
oh the big the suicide shit. Huh?
I like
But,
I'm
yeah.
interested.
Can I say, in
Like-
defense of Ilyas, he had no idea what the topic was today, and we changed it last night, and then we changed it again an hour ago. So
So
this is why things are getting so random. Yeah.
but I think my point is that there's a general understanding. I think, well, I guess we're in the West and where we're having these dialogues that which is just taken for granted that there's an individuality to everything, that we are individuals holding perspectives, causing effect on other people, and that we are responsible for those effects that we have on other people. That nothing is granted by the universe or given onto us. And I think that does alter the way in which we build up from that in terms of how much, like, let's say how much blame we give to other people, right? If everybody owns their actions and are only in those situations, like
the racism example, right?
the racism example. And I think, yeah, exactly. So the blame culture and the ad hominem stuff comes from a general consciousness that we are individuals imposing ideas on other people.
You're responsible for your
Yeah.
ideas.
And then, so if we take a more kind of holistic idea, then there's a system that is not constructed by us. And then if we take an even more kind of holistic spiritual idea, there's a God that sort of, or an energy that the ecology might maintain itself in a certain way to create certain systems, and the systems filter down and they need to be recorrected constantly in order for civilizations and in turn ecologies to function.
And that might be the key between the difference between the left and the right, in that the right skews towards a more individualistic view, whereas the left's more likely to look at social constructs, right? Like racism, they don't actually care. When they call someone racist, they're actually, if you know the philosophy behind it, they're actually not calling any individual racist. They're saying, no, you're not racist. You're not a toxic masculine male. Like it's the bigger the system.
It's almost like saying racism exists rather than like you are a racist.
You're a racist.
Whereas an individualistic, which the right tend to think of things more in those terms, take it as a personal affront. And so that's the nuance.
Yeah. But I think
we were searching for before is that those two sides are looking differently from what racism means. For some people, that's an individual responsibility. For other people, no, we're all victims of a bigger society. And then I'll let you go a level above.
Don't we still all...
We're all God's children.
Do we still, although, still have a personal responsibility to try not to be racist, though, right? Or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I love your idea, Ilyas, of the holistic way. And I'm fascinated by these ideas, but if looking at it just from a purely pragmatic perspective, like look at the law, for example, it's like there's no excuse that you go, well, it's just a holistic thing. Like we all have to take responsibility for our own actions, whether we are or are not ultimately responsible, right?
Yeah, I think that's the issue with the God sort of idea is that it's a very easy way to just you can just let go of the responsibility, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. But if it is
many a serial killer
depends on the context.
Like,
yeah, it really.
God's vision, God's plan.
That's true. Yeah. I was Jesus stabbing this man, right?
Jesus was trigger happy. What can I say?
But I think actually, it depends on. So my personal perspective is that I do believe in a certain a God and something, and I take quite a mystical perspective of it. But I do believe built into that there's like maybe in a sense a lack of responsibility. You don't own necessarily all your actions in the same way that a kind of atheistic view might have. But there is still a kind of a conscious or an intuitive impetus towards what is more benevolent in each moment.
Well, so I'm going to bring these strands in together because they seem a bit separate. Or do you want to keep separating them, right?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, if I'm separating them, maybe not.
No, you can. I'm good enough to bring the tangents together at any point you want.
Okay. He is the Gandhian Jesus of conversation.
So what I was just gonna add for the conscious part is that for me, indeed, I have a more of a holistic God perspective as well. But for me, there's sort of this pure God consciousness has been fractalized, and we're all experiencing it in a fractalized form. We're all part of this divine creating and sharing together, and therefore also evolving. And so when I'm having conversations with other people, when I'm sharing, it's also sort of God sharing and creating with itself and trying to figure out what I am. So it's sort of God observing itself in multiple perspectives at the same time. And we're sort of co-creating this.
I'm on board with that.
I'm kind of between that idea because I see it such a poetic and beautiful expression of what life could possibly be about. And then the other half of the time, I'm like, well, it's just us. We're just here, innit? So, like, just be responsible for your actions and try and be the best person you can. Do you know what I mean? There's no God, there's no... It's all just random. Yeah. So I'm like so 50-50 on that. But
well, I think that I guess, in a sense, my issue with all these things that we're, like, talking about and how to have this conversation... I think we do get caught up in language, and if we just can connect to the intention of people and be a bit more forgiving, give people the benefit of the doubt, and come from a more intangible space,
Compassion. Yeah.
And compassion, yeah, rather than the actual. I think an idea of God does foster that, or like in terms of I think from what you were saying, it kind of gives a prevalence to a non-structural kind of compassion that will in turn find its natural structure.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. For sure.
So, in a way, does it matter what we believe? Because if we all, I know we don't, but for those who see everyone as a reflection of God's image, right? Then your default position should be compassion and love, even in the event of a disagreement.
Yeah.
You are both just
compassionate
variations
curiosity.
of God's
Yeah.
Compassionate
love.
curiosity. Yeah. The thing is, I do think there's. I'm not really that pro principalism as an idea. I'm more pro an idea of a conscience and an intuition as a guiding force to understand your best form and your morality. And I try to live by that. But because we live in quite a principalized sort of society, it's very easy to read ambiguities into that. Or even if you don't live a principle, I think you can find a lot of ambiguity in that. So on a personal level, I use that, I manipulate it to further my desires, because if I don't follow a principle, I can just say, it's just intuition. So even when I'm not following my intuition, I can just say, well, I don't believe in principalism. And the desires get faulted in. And I think that's the sort of, in a sense, a fault, which a lot of these ideas that we're talking about now kind of combat. But if we're honest, the real way to fight that is just true, deep self-honesty, and say, this is what my conscience is telling me to do, but I'm just ignoring it because, I want this juicy cake or whatever it is.
Yeah, well, practical example. I understand that some people might perceive this as racist, but it's my tradition. And fuck you guys, I don't care that much to adjust.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've got my ego wrapped in it now, and I'm defensive, and I like the people that tell me I'm not racist, and I hate the people that tell me I am. So yeah, I'm not listening anymore.
So that's
But
exactly what
I
happened.
think even what you're doing there is you're mapping out what I'm talking about. You're mapping out onto a situation to find the principle, right? But what I'm saying is it's not always apparent. There isn't a map. There isn't a principle that lives in things. There's an intuition in each moment of how best to behave. And most likely it will find exactly what you just said. But the way that I try to govern my life is not by asserting that, if this scenario exists, this is what I would do.
Sure.
Do you know what I'm saying? Which it's a more complicated way to live, and more simple in a sense. It's like.
But you hold the heavy stock in not being predictable. You try hard to live in the moment, right? That's one of your guiding values.
I guess that's kind of what it is. I think,
which I find is beautifully paradoxical to your belief that we're living by God's plan.
Oh, I don't know if we're living by God's plan. I'm not sure what a plan is. I don't know if. Yeah, I'm not sure if God went to cartography school or whatever.
So does God reflect your view that no one should have a plan?
I don't know. This is what he's been telling me.
This is the argument: does God make us in His image, or do we make God in our image?
Well, I think we do both. There's two things. There's what is God, and then there's the story of God, or the narrative of God, or the poetry of God. I think definitely we make the poetry of God in our image. But what is it? And to me, the idea of God is just this omnipresent, creative vivacity that gives birth to all things. And continues to in each moment. It's it's a restructuring, reconnective, energetic space that self-corrects, to self-maintain itself. And it's the thing from exactly. And we emerge out of that.
Yeah.
And as we behave, we alter the fabric of it.
Yeah. So we need to keep interacting, because that's part of the self-feedback loop that we're all connected in. Right.
And tying it back to the topic of the
sorry, this is
sorry, Ilyas. No, it's fine. I'm good at this. So, wouldn't the universe be a boring place if there weren't these disagreements and but if there weren't blacks and whites and shades in between, I think it's interesting that religion has this tendency to proselytize, right? Like convert people. Do you think there's anything that the religious have to teach us because of that desire to persuade someone to your way of thinking? Presumably someone that didn't listen would be a very bad converter of the faith.
Well, I don't know. There are a lot of people who are quite preachy, like quite strong, and I think it does seem to work sometimes.
There's the religious cliche, right? Like standing up on a pedestal, shouting to the masses. Some people are ready for that message at some
I think when you're vulnerable, that it can really resonate. I think what a lot of religion does is it has this clear absolution that when you can't see or make sense of anything, then there's a very clear path. It's like, here is your answer. I am here for you. And maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but
everyone's looking for that. Be that a left-right argument, be that I'm not racist argument. Everyone's looking for absolution.
And I think that's
the guilt of a complex world.
Yeah. So for me, religion is completely the opposite to that. I know it often offers exactly that in many spheres, but religion is, for me, something that pays reverence to the mystery of life, and the intangible aspects of things that science can never really fully pin down.
Yeah.
This is what I told you in our first chat.
But this is like the Gnostic view that
the
comes
thing
forward
that
throughout
my
religion.
attention
Right.
was a Dominican friar who told me that for him, religion and faith are the opposite of certainty.
For sure.
And that blew my mind. And as an angry atheist, I had so many arguments for everything.
Yeah.
But when he told me, my faith is the opposite of certainty, I didn't have an argument against that.
No. But I think that's where the religion can, a faith-based integration into how we discuss and talk to people can be really powerful, because if you believe in a lack of certainty or not knowing, then the openness for dialogue and the openness for empathy is really powerful.
My man, we brought it home. We brought it full circle. That was beautiful.
Yeah. I think it's being unsure, being comfortable with the fact that you can be unsure in exactly what your beliefs are, because the fact that beliefs really can change.
And I think that's the crossover. You will persuade some people some of the time if you're like, I'm fucking certain it's definitely this.
But you won't persuade all the people all the time. Bob Marley.
There you go.
Maybe even more. Instead of persuading people, let people persuade you. Because when you accept that you don't know, and probably no one knows what is the full truth, right? And I've accepted that.
Arguing with the sea, then, right?
Let's figure it out together.
Flexible, they move.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And I think,
just invite someone to jump into the ocean of truth with you, and not even truth, the ocean of uncertainty.
Yeah, and swim. Yeah, but that's how I got into philosophy. Is I was just I was really sick for quite a while, and I got into philosophy because physically I couldn't really move so much. And when I used to travel the world and be very adventurous, I was kind of locked a bit more to my room. So I used ideas as a way for traveling or to move outside of things. And I was just if I can find this, it's like a new ocean that I found. And I just swam, and I just this is groovy. There's just awesome shit to discover. And it doesn't need to be true in order for it to be powerful and true in a sense. There can be a trueness to something which is not the truth.
Oh
but it's a dynamic whole, and it's with the truth. It's maps, so you're trying to structure the dynamic, and you can only do it part ways. But those are partial truths of a larger truth.
Yeah. I think that's true, and but I think there's also something that's kind of, if we really think it, all human beings are essentially looking for the same basic things. We all just want to love. We want to be loved. We want, food and shelter and those sort of things. But we're all essentially looking for everything, and mostly just trying to deal with our own shit, our own suffering and our own pain in the way that is, we believe is best. And from that, it seems like so many ideologies have from that impetus, so many ideologies have spurred. And there's so much synchronicity between ideologies. And I think that's amazing. Like, if you can find so many people who are right-wing, you can find so many people who are left-wing, there's so many atheists, there's so many, like, polytheists, there's so many, like, monotheists, then the perspective to say that your position is 100% true when there's so many ideologies held by so many people, all emanating from the same general kind of human impetus, mm-hmm. surely there's a reason to accept all of those things could be true.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really like the idea in theory, but I'm thinking of a few counter-examples. So what if in some of those positions, this, like, let's say there's a victim in some of these true things, right? Some of these different ideologies. Doesn't that change things a little bit? For me, it changes it. Like, if there's a victim, if there are victims being held or being, so I can't hear anything, Rains.
Sorry.
Does it basic? My basic question is, does it change things if there's a victim? Because it's very nice to say, well, everyone's kind of true and everyone's kind of right, and that's very nice. But if there's victims to one way of thinking, surely that makes it more wrong, right? Looking at it in a pragmatic sense, if a victim can be concretely linked to some ideology or way of looking at the world. No? What do you think?
Well, yes, and that is why we have laws in certain societal structure.
No, my thought was just if it changed it, if there's a victim or not. If there were victims with one of those ways of looking at the world, then would that be problematic?
Well, yeah. Well, are we in an more evolving and defining process of how can we establish there's a victim and how can we protect and stop that? Right? We do have laws, and with racism as well. It's an ever evolving conversation on how to deal with that. We do try to look at people being victims. It's not necessary to say we can stop people from becoming victims entirely.
Yeah,
you know.
I guess a better way to put my question would be: at what point does someone become wrong? If you say, well, everyone's kind of true, like, at what point do you go, well, that's actually wrong? And is that possible?
I don't know. For me, there is a tension between, like, what's practical and useful and what's epistemologically honest.
Yeah.
In the sense that if we're really talking about what's true and whether there is a victim or there is not a victim, I don't think we can really say for sure of anything. But then how we orchestrate kind of governance and systems and stuff needs to pay kind of attention to these things. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where I struggle a little bit, because I think my role in life is very much towards the abstract. And, like, in Parliament, you don't want people, like, they can't just start having a discussion about free will. Like, it doesn't.
Maybe they should.
It doesn't make.
No, it wouldn't.
Yeah,
that would be fascinating.
Well,
to see.
maybe actually they could dedicate, like, a weekend to that or something, right?
That would be so entertaining with the parliamentary theatrics. Well, what the right honourable friend forgot to mention was that, that would be amazing. Let's do that. Let's start a petition to do that. Let's go out and convince people to start a petition to get free will and philosophy discussed in the House of Parliament.
Okay, so just to fill you,
you're presuming they have anything of value to add to the conversation, though, right?
No, I just want to do it because it would be hilarious to watch. It would be very entertaining.
But that's the
even if they
whole
have
thing
nothing
of the
to
House
add.
of Commons, right? It's just entertainment.
It would be entertaining if it weren't. If they were discussing something that maybe isn't so significant.
I mean, to be honest, most of them have degrees in philosophy from Cambridge.
Do they?
Yeah,
Nah, I'm calling
or PPE.
Citation
That's
needed
the way
on
you
that.
become a minister.
How many
you get
members of
PPE.
Parliament have a degree in philosophy?
Oh, literally half of them. It's amazing. They all do PPE from Cambridge. It's one of the funniest things I ever saw from, is it Viz?
Oh, PPE. Yeah, but that's not.
Yeah, politics, philosophy, and economics.
Yeah, but it's enough to have a conversation about free will.
Yeah, it is. No, and it's brilliant. Like one of the funniest. You talk about The Onion and parody, and it was like, look, in a day where so many schools are struggling and failing, it's so good to see Eton doing so well. I think 60% of our MPs are from that one school. They must be doing something right.
Oh, jeez.
How much philosophy do they do in a
But it-
PPE degree?
A third, presumably. Like, all letters being equal.
All letters being equal. Yeah, if the alphabet isn't an illusion.
The alphabet. So how can we have a conversation if we disagree with the alphabet?
I can't. Yeah, well, I guess I don't believe in language. That's really where
Do you believe in language?
I don't think language believes in you, bro.
Yeah, I think that's. But I do think the function. Okay, this is getting a bit off topic. But
We're already way off topic. Where was the topic again?
we got close to where we were.
I tried
did,
to bring us
yeah.
back, but then I
And then you went to the loo.
break,
Yeah.
It all fell apart. That's the problem. That's why, like, chaos will always win because order only needs to take a 2-minute break.
No, hang on. I went to the
The whole
toilet.
train gets derailed.
I went to the
But
toilet.
that that's exactly what I was saying with the principalism argument. Is that the natural function of the universe is chaos, and if we have a chaotic morality to guide us, which I believe is more true, we just don't know how to navigate it. So we create false orders in order to create approximations of morality.
Do you think the
which are easier to
desire
follow.
to create ego and me to be right and you to be wrong is born of order?
Yeah, for sure.
It's that word.
It's the duality of self and environment that creates that ego.
Oof, this is a very deep topic, isn't it?
Awkward silence. You're on the wrong podcast, bro.
So oppression.
I think next we need to bring on your counterpart next time because we can't handle this fire. Like, he's really good at being like, "Shut up, you're wrong."
Yeah. Oh, is that what Shai's like?
No, I don't think so. Not at all.
Shai's good at.
So let's talk about it. No, he doesn't say you're wrong, right? But he does manage to contain the fire somehow. So how does that dichotomy work?
What, between me and my co-host?
Yeah.
Me and shit. He just asks annoying, relentless questions and poses the most absurdist idea you can consider. Right? Which sounds like me, I guess, but sometimes we just like wank each other off, and then other times we just pick holes in each other. What people are
You
saying.
mean
but-
philosophically, rather?
Philosophically.
Yeah. And no judgment. I mean,
Make for a good podcast.
Well, I mean, everything's foreplay for something else, right?
if it's
But I guess that's what the free will discussion is. It's just foreplay for what will eventually be governance.
What will eventually be what?
Governance, like that's why we want
Governance.
free will discussion in Parliament, right? Mijan brought up the idea.
Marijn.
Majine.
Yes.
Close
I
enough.
mean, I pronounce his name badly, but
Right.
vision.
Majine. Okay,
It's like a meringue, like the
Majine.
dessert.
Majine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Meringue?
Marijn.
Marijn. Yeah.
Marijn. You still haven't got it right. Okay.
No, I don't.
He hasn't
But
done
I'm
that.
better than you. I won't take
that's fair enough.
criticism from you.
But I think the interesting point is like, so how do we conflate a kind of, let's say, an uncertainty and a epistemological honesty with the idea that there's real world problems happening and we need certain kind of legislation in order to prevent sufferings occurring in the world, right?
Yes. And it's easy to be kumbaya, my lord, round a circle, let's all agree with each other. But when legislation is literally hurting people. And damaging people, does your ego in or out of that conversation matter when there's bigger issues at stake?
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't forget though that we're also just in a cultural perspective, and we all might be pacifists who wanna, no one to get hurt. But in the meantime, the Chinese think it's their fair game to imprison Uyghurs and teach them more Chinese cultural behaviors. I disagree
Well, yeah,
with it, but it's
in realistic terms,
I'm not gonna change
are
them.
any of us going to fix the Chinese policy. Like, it's just like, honestly, being disappointed with Chinese government is like being upset with an earthquake. Like,
Exactly, but
no
you-
one on
it's-
earth
it's-
is capable of changing that.
No, but that's what
the American president
with
can't
everything.
affect Chinese
Nah,
policy.
that's
But
fake.
Chris-
That's a
Chris,
fallacy,
that's
Chris.
Chris, that's almost with everything. You're not gonna change most things, I think.
Well, no. Literally, no one is able to stop China from invading a neighboring country, and we do nothing when either China or Russia does it.
But not just China. You were not able to avoid Trump
Okay,
getting
but-
elected. You're not able to
No.
avoid Bolsonaro getting elected.
Yeah,
You know.
so why argue with someone on social media about it? Honestly, that's
Exactly.
I think that's a bigger problem, is that we spend a lot of our time arguing about things that we have no agency over whatsoever.
That
Really,
would be-
it's the illusion of control. I shouted at someone who was racist in my view, so I'm winning. Do you know what you really could do? And I've said this last time, I'll say it again. If all of us wrote a letter to an MP, we would have so much more effect on the world than
I don't know.
any of these.
I don't know about you
arguments
guys,
based
but I
on social
do.
media.
I do write
If we
letters.
were nice to someone in our community, that would have more
Exactly.
of an effect than
Yeah.
any argument we could have with anyone. Oh, I'm stressing about China. Who gives a fuck?
Yeah.
Like Obama couldn't stop Russia.
Exactly.
Obama
Yeah.
and the EU couldn't
No.
stop Russia from invading Ukraine.
No.
Trump hasn't done anything, despite his tough talk, from all of China's recent human rights abuses. But we could be a little bit kinder to the person next to us. And the next time we disagree with someone, we could listen a bit more and hear them a bit more and remove our ego a bit from the conversation.
Yeah.
And not start that conversation presuming that we're right and they're an idiot.
Yep.
And not enter that conversation trying to emerge victorious like some heroic gladiator. Sorry, but you're not. Like when you're talking to an old man about his racism, you're not the hero in an action movie.
No, I'm like, I can't agree with this more.
Yeah.
I think like if we refine our intentions, then they will naturally find their most benevolent systems.
And we all want to be heard.
Yeah.
So go
And we
out and
to
have
understand
coffee
that
with a
the
stranger.
people we're talking to want to be heard too.
Yeah.
The tangible
So-
thing is have a coffee with a stranger and have a open conversation. Listen, be kind. For me, that's the tangible thing.
And the intangible thing is being kind and empathetic and willing to learn and to listen to other people.
Yeah, that's what I can do.
Oh.
Not just say what I can do as well.
So I'm going to try an example, and I don't know whether it will be useful or it will derail us as much as a couple of Ilyas did.
Why not? I have the horror edit anyway.
But let's try it anyway, because fuck it, right? We're freewheeling at this point. So I'm getting old, and I'm feeling old, and the main way that happened was that yesterday I went to this meetup, and we started the meeting going round in a circle and being like, okay, here's the safe word, and if anyone feels uncomfortable at any point, you say this word and we can stop the topic of conversation. So yeah, there was this card on the table that we were allowed to touch as our symbol that we were uncomfortable with the conversation. And then like we went round the group, and there's like 8 people around this table. What are your pronouns? We go around, and the first person they asked was my friend who's a software engineer. And it was just the most awkward person to ask possibly, because he was like confused by the question. He was like, what? What? And I just said, just tell them him, he. Him, he? It was like I was teaching him a foreign language. And when they go to me, I'm like, yeah, the same. And then there's this like Chinese girl who's like new to the game, and she thought it was part of the game. She's like, what, is my character allowed to be a woman? Is that a problem? Is that what no, just tell them you're a woman, it's fine. And this conversation took half an hour of awkwardness, and I just couldn't help but sit watching it, being like, I understand the theory of let's be polite to each other, let's not be dickheads.
So was anything
But I'm
unexpected?
just
Like,
an old man that I was just like, I couldn't help but feel, what the fuck are we achieving here? Like, I wish we could just start the conversation on the assumption of good faith. And if someone's a bullying dickhead, I'll deal with them. Don't worry. I'll pick them up and throw them out in the pub. It's fine.
yeah, but you're massive. Not everyone's your size.
Well,
Do you know what I mean?
yes. Which is why I'm like, why are we spending an hour talking
Yeah, but
about
like
feelings?
one. My point is that like
let's be
not every
nice and I'll
time
handle
there's going to
the
be something
transgressors,
perfect. Just
don't
chuck
you
it
worry.
out. Was there any interesting? Were there any interesting or different pronouns than what you'd expect?
No, none. Which is why it was all the more just like a wasted opportunity. I'm like,
Right.
But maybe that just happened so that you could make this point in the podcast.
Yeah.
Which I don't really know what your point is, but like it's a
Hey,
good
what
one.
is your point? That you're getting old and you can't be bothered with people
no,
talking
my
about.
point is that we're talking about talking with people we disagree with, bridging philosophical differences, understanding our differences, and I'm realizing I'm old, and the same as when I have an argument with my dad and he doesn't get trans people or the argument of a lot of modern politicians. I'm getting to that point where I don't understand a 20-year-old. And I find them oversensitive and they find me undersensitive. And, you know, your Swatch Pete example, I fear that in 10 years' time, I will be called a bad racist person. And I will resent it. And I will hate those people. and I will not be willing to listen.
Have we not
to them.
established that if
And
you're not
I
a
can't wait
racist, it doesn't
till
matter?
I can't wait till millennials are a bit older and they get called racist, bigoted dickheads by the younger generation before them. And they turn to me and go, oh my God, I'm like, I know, right? Like, I saw this coming.
But it doesn't matter. If someone calls you a racist and you're not, like, it's not the end of the world, is it? Although people seem to.
Yeah, but I can get it here with sort of. It's the same discussion as with consent, right? It's like, do you need complete written consent? Does it need to be completely vocalized before any act happens, right? It's the same here. You're trying to create a safe space before you even know that there's even a necessity to create a safe space.
Yeah, you're assuming danger,
right?
Right.
Instead of assuming the well-being of people and you know,
I guess
their good intentions,
happen,
and then if they turn out to have bad intentions, let's deal with it at that point.
Yeah.
But again, that ages you because the younger generation thinks that no, there's an unacceptably high rate of sexual assault. But our views are outdated, and no, that's not acceptable.
But it's probably a cynicism that comes from like globalization and the news and everything, that we have access to all the horrible things that are happening every day in a way we never used to.
The older you get, the more jaded you get.
So in that regard,
no, but I'm saying the young people have this because they've grown up in a situation where they're exposed to the media and stuff. So this cynicism that there is terrorism, there is war, there is rape, there's all of the shit around us that we've got to create systems in order to mediate it on a daily basis. Like, do you consent?
So this is a very big problem with the daily news cycle because it's so interested in the violence and the bloody and the murder and the problems of society. So it feeds you back this day and day. I've been reading a very interesting book right now from a Dutch historian. It's only available in Dutch right now, but it will probably get translated. And it's about how most people are good. And he goes into a lot of history to show why humans in general want to be good people and want to cooperate in a good way with each other. But the idea of people has become more that if something happens, we'll just murder each other, right? If the layer of society disappears, we'll turn into animals and we'll all strive for each other.
We're all 4 meals away from
Fact is,
big revolt.
Fact is, all the research results of the last 20 years have been pointing exactly to the opposite. And not just recent research results, but this is a very ingrained idea, concept in society that people generally are bad. And science is proving the opposite.
I see this in my life, like, just happen. If I go on social media or something, my general idea of people is quite aggressive, indignant, angry, like people always making a point. And when I go outside of social media and I talk to people, like, none of my friends behave like this in real conversation. I don't have these interactions ever, like on the street or with people. Everybody just generally does come from they're just nice.
Yeah. And tries to get along.
Yeah. And it's only when I look at my phone that I get educated outside of this perspective, I feel.
But again, educated presumes that that's right.
It's not right.
No, I mean,
so it's not right.
Wrong, whereas actually it's a weird lens.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying.
Like it's a weird filter.
Yeah, but I guess I just
It's
think
it's an
education is
illusion
like-
that is feeding you, and
Brainwash.
it's an illusion based on paranoia and fear that is perpetuated, I think, by media and people in power. And a good example, and this historian opens with this in the book, is during the Second World War, when the Germans were going to bomb England. Churchill had a speech where he said, if the Germans are going to bomb, chaos is going to break out, the whole system is going to collapse, economy is going to go into a standstill, and this whole idea that you could put the fear into people. So the Germans bombed England, and exact opposite happened. People started to cooperate, people got used to the bombs falling, people just built up community, the economy kept growing. So they studied this during the Second World War. The findings were given to the English, I don't know, army generals, navy generals, whatever. And what did they decide to do, or what did the government decide to do? They decided to do the exact same thing to Germany and bomb Germany to shit at the end of the World War, thinking to hope to achieve exactly the same, right? Human chaos, societal collapse. Let's bring Germany to a standstill. Research.
Despite the evidence of the opposite.
So what did researchers do after World War II? They went into Germany and they studied and they talked to people and they tried to get a clear picture of what actually happened when the bombs were falling. And exactly the same happened as in England. People cooperated, people gained community, people were very social, helping each other. The economy kept going better. And yet we keep doing this. We keep trying to suppress people with fear and it keeps failing.
And I think that's a beautiful point to take this episode home. Because I feel that a lot of the arguments that we're all aware of on social media, it's a sign of the good times, right? Like if things actually mattered, if we were actually debating, like if we were in the middle of World War III, we wouldn't be debating a black Santa Claus, whatever. No offense, Brian. But we sweat the small stuff in the absence of real problems, and it's a sign of the good times that we have time to debate these intricacies and nuances and details. And funnily enough, like I raised the example of my racist uncle on Facebook, but last week my grandma died, and he was one of the first people to reach out to me and send me a really heartfelt, lovely message. Wow. And I think that's what it comes down to, is that, like me, a lot of people enjoy arguing on social media, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're your enemy, and they're wrong, and that you're combative.
Yeah, they're just humans, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny to say that we're stuck in these tribalistic things, but honestly, sometimes it's more like a team sport than a world war.
Yeah.
Should be.
It's fun to argue. Honestly. That's why we engage on social media. It's fun.
Yeah, I think that honesty to just say like, we are masturbating into the wind, but it's fun, it's nice, it's like, it's good. And
we're not solving these problems.
No, but I think,
it's just fun to debate. It's like boxing with big foam gloves. Like no one really gets hurt.
And I think an acceptance of that returns us to this idea of like becoming more empathetic. When you realize that we're just in discussion to have discussion, to connect with each other, to be in these spaces, to like find ways to relate,
even if
in ways that are stimulating.
Actually,
even though
even if Chris is trolling,
engage with someone, you are you are choosing to communicate with someone. And share ideas and listen to their ideas.
Yeah, and I think that the ideas themselves are superficial. It's actually that you're using them to
listen to someone, even if you're arguing with them. Actually, I think there is this simplistic view that we should be always agreeing. It's fine that we're not. It's fine.
Yeah, but it's how you argue, right? It's like
even if you're a dick about it, like. As long as you're not making them cry, you both on. When I'm arguing with someone on Facebook, with someone that's arguing me on Facebook, I don't think either of us are crying about it. I think we both know what we're doing. We're both choosing to spar. We play boxing with ideas, and even if we don't come to a consensus, is that a bad thing? Yeah. We'll survive. Right? Like worse things have happened than you disagree.
Sure. And if you don't like it, you can always sit and look at the
That's
wall.
a great thing to
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm down
Nugget
with
of
that.
advice.
Yeah. No, I think I need to paint my wall though. Truthful words are not beautiful. Beautiful words are not truthful. Good words are not persuasive. Persuasive words are not good. Said Lao Tzu.
And therefore,
Goodness isn't it?
therefore, bad words are good.
Yeah.
I know some persuasive bad words.
That's not what he said.
I'm just winded you
No,
up.
not therefore.
I know.
That's not what. There's no therefore. If he had said therefore, there'd be therefore.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, to create that.
No, I think you're right, because the main function of this is to destroy duality.
The rain is trickling down the face of a fallen angel
I'm really sorry if I just derailed
who
everything.
sits and cries to her secret in a smile. She's left on her own, puzzling over what came before her, looking for a simple life where everything will be alright.
It's weird, he's actually he's less abstract.
It's a trick in the light. It's a trick in the light. It's a trick in the light. And she'll always be with me. Well, it's wake up time and I really don't wanna know.
This is the podcast.
It's wake up time and I really don't wanna know.
I'm about to argue.
Well, it's wake up time and I'm sitting in my bed and I can't be asked to get out. I'm relieved at the rain as it hides my shame from sleeping the whole day
I'm
out.
really interested.
And I know it could be worse as I start to surf for the latest flicks to come out. But then I slump right down and I take a little rest and I try and figure it all out. It's a trick of the light. Ooh, it's a trick of the light. Ooh, it's a trick of the light. And she'll always be with me.
None of that vitriol. And they had a good conversation. The way they did it was quite talking about views.
Thoughts buzzing in the back of my mind. Up to find. Thoughts buzzing in the back of my mind. Up to find. Up to find.
I'm gonna listen to that.
Just that, like it was like a half hour.
Don't listen to ours.
I thought that's quite
We just ended up.
I'm starting to learn. Yeah, 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 I'm starting to learn.
I tried
Yeah, I'm
to.
starting
I
to
tried
learn.
to ask questions to try and understand.
I didn't ask many questions. No.
No, we came in and he said some.
Well, no, because he didn't let me speak.
Yeah, but even you, Finn, like,
He didn't let me
was
speak.
so shocked by
When
what
I
he
answered
said
his
that it was
questions,
like a
so-
gut punch.
And
He
maybe
was like
not-
the
and maybe not
example
the
of like
right
the
question.
worst
I heard you
possible
get
way to have a
winded.
conversation. It's
Right.
just like shout over people.
But
No,
but there's different.
and it was odd
there's
because I
different
had a
questions.
conversation with him and I thought he'd be better than that because we did have a nuanced conversation and he admitted some of the failings of the philosophy, which is why I thought it'd be an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
But yeah, when it came down to it, like he was just like, well, black people just have a lower IQ. It's this like Sam Harris bell curve bullshit of like, oh, just black people are stupider. You're like,
Yeah.
Were you going to let that sentence fly? Or are you going to disagree with them? Like, and once he opened with that, you're
Yeah,
like,
but you need to avoid and get down to a different truth, right? If he's saying that, indeed, ask the question: do you think you're always right? That's a much more interesting
which is
path
what
than to
these guys
walk
did
on than
beautifully,
to
which is
fall
why
into
I
his trap.
can't-
Because we were falling into
I
his
can't
trap.
recommend enough the podcast episode where they interview Katie Hopkins. It's not their best episode because Katie Hopkins is the guest. But it's a beautiful summary of how you guys handle a conversation
Mm-hmm.
and being willing to talk to her and avoid, the railroad she wanted to run on.
Mm-hmm.
Your ability to derail a conversation was so powerful then. Because you never ran on her, track. Her cliched track. You just, no, fuck it. Whoa, we're going to the moon on a tangent. Yeah. And because of that, you had a beautiful conversation. It's weird how lovely your conversation was with Katie.
She was actually really, thank you, man. And she was actually really great to talk to. She was nice. She was intelligent, witty. She listened to us. Everything that you hear about her is, her views, I don't think we agreed with really any of her views. But actually, the idea that, there is no absolute truth, we had that in common. And it's kind of...
Of all the reality TV stars of our age, she's probably intentionally manipulated it for her fame. She's now best-selling book author, journalist, TV talking head.
And hasn't she recently been found guilty, though, of some crime that she's been fined quite heavily for?
Yep. And she had to sell our house, probably the house where you interviewed her.
Oh, really?
Right? Yeah, she's just had to sell that house to pay for lawyers' fees, and a bunch of people are cheering for that.
Oh, what?
Yeah.
Oh, she was found guilty, wasn't she? Of the... Such a bad anecdote. She was found guilty of a crime. I don't have any more.
Google it and we'll edit it.
I think that's kind of... But I think that's also the problem, that there is a kind of hatred built into our altruism. That there's this idea that we kind of love the idea that she had to sell her house to pay that she had to go through shit because of what she's.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's really a great sort of.
I'd rather people live good, happy lives and then learn what is better and what is not better.
Okay,
people
but
suffer.
She did accuse
And I think the good nature.
Sometimes you need to maybe learn through suffering, but I don't wish necessarily suffering on everyone. I wish compassion on everyone.
You talked about the example earlier of someone being racist to someone. She accused someone of defacing a war memorial, but that wasn't true.
Okay, so the law system corrects,
that
right?
person sued her for slander. And she used her large media presence to slander someone and got sued for damages.
But could she did she agree that it wasn't true after? Had she said, because maybe if she comes to the knowledge and says, I'm sorry, I made a grave mistake or whatever, that we should offer her the space to do so rather than just throw her in the ditch, no? I do think a lot of our issues are that we don't put a foot first in forgiveness. Yeah. It's more about retribution. Yeah. And I think if we had a society in the way in which we engage in people give a little more prevalence to forgiveness over retribution, we could.
Especially for people you don't even know. Right?
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
very easy to, I've just heard this one little snippet about this person. And goddamn, and let this person suffer. And,
I just read slander against person on Twitter that she didn't know about.
Can I just interject here with the person that it happened to, Monroe, said at the news of the everything that's happened. She said that they said my offer of a cup of tea still stands if she wants to talk about it. Lots of people are celebrating, but I'm not. It's sad. It's a sad, lonely sort of anti-climax. It's really crap, and I feel really bad. It's all ended up like this. I thought she'd just say sorry. That kind of just sums it up, really, isn't it? It's like, oh, God. Yeah. Even the person who was the victim doesn't feel great about this whole thing.
Wouldn't that have been better?
Kind of.
Yeah.
I bet the lawyers who got handsomely paid on both sides enjoyed it much more.
But I think that's the thing. I think that's part of the issue is that a lot of the time we're just fighting for issues that the so-called victims, it's like, it's like we're appropriating their struggle. That they don't even get a voice to talk about how they really feel. I'm sure that's
after the whole thing. I'm not sure they would have felt the same at the time, but after the verdict happened, just goes to show, doesn't it? It's not all like, yes, now justice has been done. I doubt Hopkins feels great about it either,
Yeah. I mean, some of the stories she told us were quite, I don't know, it had like death threats and panic alarms installed in her house and all kinds of, I mean, not that I, like, she's definitely got intolerant views or like things that.
No,
but that doesn't mean you deserve that.
Yeah. I just think if, like, it's the basic Gandhi thing, like, if you fight an eye with an eye, you leave the whole world blind. And so if we're going to, like, move out of any kind of binary idea of anything, then we should try, when faced with malice, we should try and offer kindness if we can, and then get it thrown back in our face, and then just keep trying a little bit.
And there is this idea that, oh no, but I'm fighting racism. I'm a hero. They're the villain.
Yeah.
I know why it appeals to people's egos. I just don't buy into it.
And it's the teach by example, not by, be kind, show your kindness. Maybe somebody will see it and
demonstrably the world doesn't need another angry person shouting on Twitter. I can guarantee you, if you think that's the fix,
there's loads of
it's
them.
not. The world isn't like, if only there was one more angry person on Twitter, all these problems would be fixed.
Yeah, they need to be on Reddit.
You definitely need to check out Reddit. I do.
Be kind on Reddit.
I don't know, I'm going to stay
Engage with Change My View. And write a letter to your MP. Thanks, guys.
From Cordoba, I'm Finn.
From London, I'm Chris.
From Amsterdam, I'm Marijn.
From London, I'm Ilyas.
Thanks, guys.
See you later.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Next time.
Does anyone have a song for this episode? We can stop recording.